of two-part video series. If you're seeing this one for the first time, you might want to go back and watch the other one before this of the same title. And it just doesn't say part one on it. It just says this title. So generally what we're talking about here is how non-dual teachings and pointers are very helpful and vital on the path to help you recognize the presence that's already here. And in fact, in some ways wouldn't change a thing about the non-dual teachings and pointers that are out there because they're very clear, but they're not enough. Now, how can I say something like that? You see, I feel like I stand in the unique position of being one of the only non-dual teachers who has done years and years of one-on-one work. Now, when I say years and years, I mean upwards to like 12,000. I don't know how many sessions. I counted them at once and it was 10,000 one-on-one sessions. And that was a couple of years ago, a few years ago. So meeting with people one-on-one, the message and the teaching that I have to give evolves because it's a dynamic teaching. Inquiry is a dynamic process. And so it changes as we learn more. So through the years, the inquiry process has been able to adapt and evolve with them to meet the needs of actual people on the path. And that's why it's remained fresh. Whereas some of the teachings that don't have inquiry and they have like just pointers, verbiage, those things sometimes can get stuck because they're not evolving to meet the needs of people. And especially if a teacher is not doing a lot of one-on-one work. Because then when in a group setting, when you're meeting with people and talking to them, but you're not really hearing them bare their soul. You're not hearing all the details of their life, the manifestation of illness or chronic pain, body contraction, dark night of the soul, all these things that do happen to people on the search. You like if you're teaching in front of a group all the time, you won't hear all those details. And you can even fall prey to just kind of regurgitating your normal, as a teacher, your normal pointers, almost like a programming. And so what happened is that I stopped doing that once I started meeting with people one on one. I really stopped doing, I mean, I'll do groups every now and then, but what I saw is that there's a lot is hiding from teachers. And until we can meet with people one on one, we can't even see what's going on. And what's going on is that people are discovering exactly what the title of this video says, which is they became interested in non dual teachings or in presence teachings, enlightenment teachings, have had some degree or even a complete shift or some sort of shift into awareness. And yet the body keeps the score. Essentially, that's the bottom line. The body holds physiologically, even sometimes, the manifestation of what hasn't been resolved. Now, that's not just Scott talking spiritual woo woo stuff. Science, alongside us, for the last 10 years, has been studying the degree to which trauma that's unresolved and emotional repression, repression of thoughts and feelings, actually contribute, are a major contributing factor to mental health and physical issues. Yes, physical diseases. So we're living in a different time right now, and many of us don't know it. We're living in a time where science, in my view, is uncovering this whole other dimension of our experience to let us know that what we think is the cause of things might not at all be the cause of things. Where we often think of the physical causation or environmental causations or even genetic for diseases, those things are there. But the degree to which we suffer emotionally, experience trauma, is just as much of a factor in these issues. And so we're just living in a different time. Like we did not have that information, nor did we have the information of how trauma is stored in the body. We didn't have that 20, 30, 100 years ago. So many of these teachings are regurgitating some of the same pointers from the past and just ignoring science, really, just ignoring it across the board. So, what happens then is if we're not ignoring the need to change and evolve teachings to meet the actual experience of people, then it becomes dead at a certain point, and not completely dead, but only useful to a certain extent. This is what I experienced when I had the chronic pain. Come to find out, it was mostly emotional, psychological stuff repressed, but none of the teachings or the pointers could take me there. So we had to develop our inquiries, the Kiloby inquiries, to deal with this. And so now that we've learned how to do this, to go deeper into the somatic experience and pull up and clear the unconscious programming there, I'm here on YouTube expressing that so that you know that we've developed that. Here's a question that came as a result of the first part of this video series. So just notice one particular thing that seems to happen for me is that there is a knot in my thoughts as well, where it feels staying with my thoughts or trying to bring something up itself feels like repression of something. I guess at that point, it's about acknowledging whatever response to this comes up at the moment, like, this scares me. I don't want this. I would rather focus on something else. But it's late and I want to rest now. These are some of the things that the mind says. Or to go back into the somatic experience instead of pushing through. Seems as soon as we recognize we have some avoidant tendencies or resistances, instead of just going along with some distraction, we are already on the path of awareness, even if we cannot dismantle it right away. So he's saying as soon as we recognize we have some avoidant tendencies or resistance, we're in awareness, we're aware of that. He said, I found resolve, courage, and determination to be quite important at some points, but it's probably one of the more dangerous attitudes to try to pretend that there is when it's not at any given point. I guess there is a reason people tend to have resistance to this kind of work. It can be very tricky and potentially dangerous if not done skillfully. Maybe the real block is disregarding our ability to do skillful work before we even really go on the journey. Well, there's so much here, guys. It's a really brilliant question. Or, of course, the belief there is nothing to look into in the first place, right? But that we have some, or a lot, hesitation before letting go of whatever we think keeps us safe is as normal as it can be. I mean, this question sums it all up in a way of the kinds of traps that people get into and just the issues that come up. But let me speak right off the bat about something that he's saying, which is he says there's a knot in his thoughts as well, where it feels like staying with his thoughts or trying to bring something up itself feels like repression of something. But then he goes on to say, I guess at that point it's about acknowledging whatever response to the inquiry comes up. That's what it is. So this is really difficult to describe because of how unconscious it is. But when you think about it this way on the path, when you learned, for example, that when you have an emotion, you just come down and just be present with it, right? It's very simple pointing in non-duality. It's like, oh, there are some thoughts. That's not you. Rest is awareness, or whatever the pointer is. And even if it's somatic, sometimes the pointers are like, if there's a feeling there, just let it be as it arising. And so we learn on one hand that to avoid bypassing, we want to be present to what's arising in the body. Because if we're not, and we're trying to distract ourselves out of these just emotions that come up, literally we're bypassing. But when it comes to like these contractions in our bodies, the contracted heart, the throat, stomach, or chronic pain, coming down to feel those things directly would be to miss a lot of the unconscious thoughts that are connected to it. So people are making this error all over the world where they're coming down and just feeling, resting it with a contraction, not realizing there's a bunch of unconscious thoughts connected. So this person is starting to discover these thoughts that are connected to the body. And he's saying that trying to bring that up feels like repression of something, but actually it's not. It's to not see these things that would be the repression. That's what repression is. So when these things start to come up, they're showing themselves to you. And then resting with them and seeing them and allowing them is so important. When you say you're repressing something by bringing up unconscious programming, I can't imagine what that would be, except that maybe you are repressing the fact that there's resistance that has to be dealt with. It sounds like there's resistance. So you might need to do some inquiry on the resistance first because maybe you're not fully awake to it and inquiring into it yet, so it's running the show. And I've given videos where I explain how to work on resistance. So I'm not going to say that here. Um, but in those moments, the mind is very clever. So in those moments where you start inquiring into the body and you start seeing unconscious programming, like I'm scared, I'm not safe, whatever. When you start seeing that, it's the mind will start telling all sorts of lies like this. It'll say, well, I feel like if I bring this up, I'm repressing something. Well, the only thing that, again, you could be repressing would be resistance because you're literally not repressing these very scary programs when they come up. So when they come up to awareness, that's not repression, that's the opposite. So if there's something else you're repressing, it could be some of the thoughts around resisting this kind of work, right? And maybe you caught on to that with your question. So, but you even say that's when some of these thoughts come up, you kind of go back to resting in the somatic experience instead of looking at the thoughts. This to me, that's the bypass right there, is coming back down to the body, even when the body is producing all of these previously unconscious thoughts for you to witness. They may be scary, but they're still coming up for you to see and for you to see that they're not you, to unhook from them. But instead, you go back down to the body. That's to me the bypass right there. It is not a bypass to generally looking at stuff that was unconscious and now it's coming up. It can be scary. It's not really a bypass. And maybe that's what you're saying is that maybe your mind has gotten so clever that in the midst of actually bringing unconscious stuff up, it just says somehow no to that and tells the story that you're repressing or something. I mean, mind is really clever. I've heard almost everything. I've heard people say the same thing in a session that you said, which is it like if they're feeling a strong contraction in the chest, even though they've sat with that contraction for many hours in meditation, whatever, and nothing really happens with it. So resting with it doesn't do anything but show you there's a contraction there. So they'll do that and then they'll come to me and we'll start looking at some of the unconscious thoughts that are connected to it and even be getting relief from that in the chest. And the mind will say, well, I still feel like I'm bypassing something in the chest. But what you're doing in that moment is you already have felt and been with the sensation, the contraction. You've already been doing that. Most of the people that I work with have already felt this contraction and even rested with it and done some inquiry with it for years, most of them. So when you finally start to unearth the unconscious thoughts through this work that are attached to that, see how you would be pulled away from that because seeing this is starting to see some of your most precious programming of survival. So naturally, the mind's going to come up with something right then to just move out of the looking right there. And it comes up with this very clever idea, which is that I need to come back down and feel the sensation because I'm bypassing that. But again, you've been resting with that sensation and missing the unconscious programming. That's why the contraction is there because you're literally not mining out or asking the right questions or good questions that will pull out the conditioning and thoughts that keeps the contraction in place. So you see, the bypass on this level is not like when there's a feeling coming up, just emotional release or something, and you just rest with it, where you rest with that in order to not bypass that feeling. This is different. The bypassing here happens by not being aware of the thoughts. They keep the contraction in place. It isn't to avoid the bypassing, you do not come down and feel the contraction directly because the contraction is hiding unconscious programming. So, in not seeing the unconscious mental programming, that's the bypass on that somatic level. Now, that might not be good news to someone who's seeing a lot of scary thoughts like this, like, I don't want this. I would rather focus on something else. These thoughts that this person, but these thoughts are, you can hear it. That's the programming of bypassing right there. So I don't want to deal with this. So you're literally bypassing the bypassing. That programming that says this is too scary. That I would say more that that's actually the resistance. So you might want to go again into resistance because that's what I hear in the viewpoints coming up. I don't want this. I would rather focus on something else. So I think you hit the nail on the head that this isn't what's really going on is the resistance to being with this. So you might want to start and just say things like, I trust myself, my experience completely. And then the resistance thoughts may come up and just resting with them, seeing them all, repeating that. Or then you could go into, I don't have to resist this work for any reason. Or I want to go deep into this with this work. Then you're going to hear the thoughts that object. Your resistance will come up for you to see. So you're bringing it up for yourself to see. Because even in not seeing that, it can be a bypass. And not seeing that resistance is stopping you, it easily leads to a bypass. So being able to witness these thoughts that come up with these inquiries and letting them all fall away and resting as awareness can move you into more openness around the work. The resistance stops a lot of people in the front end. You got to move through that skillfully to get, because beyond the resistance is where the freedom is. Because that's when you stop being afraid to go to these places, then you can go and feel into these areas in the body and pull up this stuff and observe it when you're ready. But if there's resistance, honor that for now. Just means you're not ready at this moment. Do some resistance inquiry so that your system becomes more open to it.